Natural Resource Advisory Board. Yeah, are there any changes to be suggested for the agenda?
None.
Okay, hearing none, I want to start with the issue of the charter revision. We had three concerns about the old charter, which was put together in the late 1980s. One, it doesn't include ponds. The second, it's entirely recommendation oriented. It's not action oriented. And thirdly, it seems to imply that we have some sort of oversight over the shellfish management plan. That may have been true in the late 1980s, but I think the shellfish department has come a long way since then and should be seen on an equal basis to ours. So what we now propose is a harbor plan and a ponds plan. So that gets the word ponds in there. We work with town and town committees to follow up the implementation of the harbor and ponds plans. So that's action oriented and still gives us an oversight over natural vistas and fauna within the town. If we agree with the changes, the next step would be to take it to the Board of Selectmen and see what their reaction is. I haven't discussed it with any of the members of the Select Board yet. Comments? Changes?
None.
I thought it looked good.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we've had some discussion of this before, and I think I would agree the way you've run it, John.
Need a vote to authorize me to take this to the Select Board because, and it will actually have to go to town meeting because if you look, I think we'll have to go to town meeting. The original charter was by town meeting in 1987. So I think that implies that this will need to go to the Select Board and then through the Select Board to town meeting, which I believe is in April. So have a show of hands, all in favor? Aye. Thank you very much. I think it's an improvement, so we'll see if other people in town agree. Being near the end of 2021, every town committee is required to make a annual report. This goes in the little booklet that the town publishes, be published about February. So we talk here. I think that the hardest thing is the second paragraph where I wanted to commend those actions for taking place, but make it sure that it wasn't. It was due to the hard work of other people, not just NRAB. Then it talks about the harbor management plan. We talk about working to implement. We'll talk about in a minute or two. And then we add the ponds issue. So if there are any comments, changes, speak up now, because the next step, what I will ask is a vote that we submit this to the town for publish in the town yearly monograph. Again, we've talked about this before, so just some minor changes since the last time, but this is coming to a vote now.
Approve.
Yes,
Okay, all in favor?
aye.
Thank you very much. We're on a roll.
After a slow start.
Right. Well, we got to make up time. We talk about a harbor survey. We often talk about it in terms of repeating the Curley report. And I've written something which can be used as a request for proposals when we go outside. I have not had a clear message from town hall whether we can go outside, get a proposal, pick a proposal, and use that as a basis for approval at town meeting, or whether we have to wait for town meeting to give us a more general budget ahead of time. I prefer the former because it gives us some clarity and lets us get started this summer. Whereas if we have to go through town meeting and then go out for a proposal, we'll be into the fall and we'll essentially wasted another summer. I've also tried in writing this to be a lot more specific about what we're looking for. And I've had, even since I wrote this, some discussion with the shellfishermen and shellfish department to clarify some of the messages there, and particularly to try to identify places in the harbor which are actually wild, as opposed to certainly aquaculture and also culched, though I think we should include it one area, maybe two areas which are culched as a further control. So any comments or discussion?
I took the opportunity to circulate a document while I was waiting to get in the meeting this morning. That was a draft. John, I know you and I have talked about this a little bit, about some of the things that should be included in it and who might help with it. So you can read that at your leisure. I think that there's two basic issues here, it seems like to me, is one of which is deciding whether or not we are able to go ahead and choose a few places to get a request for a proposal and send it out so that we can do that prior to town meeting. I was under the impression that that was something we could do, and that way we would be better informed when we talked about it at town meeting to say, here are three proposals, or here are some ideas. I think for me, it makes sense to do that ahead of time, just in terms of, I think any 3 or 4 places or 5 places we choose are all going to have different ideas about what should be done and what needs to be quantified about harbor, stuff going on in the harbor. So I think that those ideas are going to be helpful in formulating what the final study / action plan is going to look like. Again, I think that that's something I think we should do. I think we should go out and find a few places, see what they have in mind, say, here's a basic broad strokes of what we got in mind. What would you think and how much would it cost? And that way, that's my preference anyways, would be to have something like that ready to go at town meeting so that we could just get a yay or nay vote and then go ahead.
I had from an administrator an indication that would be possible. two things, John.
Yeah.
But I haven't had a confirmation from purchasing agent, Rebecca Ruffley. The other thing that you is I'm not sure how detailed we should make this a request for proposal, because it's an interesting balance. We want to be sure that what happens is basically within our framework. On the other hand, you want to leave opportunity. Partly what you're buying when you hire someone to do this is their expertise. So we want to be sure that we don't get in the way of whoever gets a contract using their best expertise.
John, maybe one of the things you could do is on this list, you could say items to be studied and measured could include, as opposed to should include. I don't know if that makes a difference, but
Yeah, I think maybe that's what I mean, I may have changed could to should, just so that, I think I used to say could, and I just changed it literally this morning because I'm thinking, let's make it a little bit firmer. But I think you're right, both of you. I mean, I think the idea that I'd rather hear, these are ideas, these are all things that are basically part of the original Curley report. And I think that, you know, it's just a starting point. It can be trimmed, but, you know, when it comes to, here's what we want to do, you know, Horsley, Witten, or whoever it's going to be, that we're going to say, here's a company that might be able to help us. Here's what a report said back in 1972. We'd like to see what you think about how we should redo it today and what's going to be valuable to be replicated on, say, every 10 years. How can we do that? And budget it in. I think the important thing is to keep continuity going here so that we can figure out a way that the town can budget this for the future. And so, yeah, I don't know what to do. I mean, like I said, that document that I put together was basically for discussion to figure out where we're going next. And I think that it can be trimmed down to just a basic, you know, couple of ideas that say, you know, you can attach the Curley report to any solicitation. Just say, here's the report from 1972 here, and we'd like to start doing this on a 10-year basis as recommended. What do you think we should do? And see what ideas float out of the experts that do the work.
Part of, John, one of the things that maybe lean in the direction of being a little more specific is I've looked a couple of times at the shellfish section in the old Curley report, and I've talked to some people in the shellfish business and office, and there are some real mistakes in the old report about shellfishing. And there's also some problems about finfish for that matter. But in shellfishing, they imply that all the quahogs came from the deep channel and all the oysters came from the shoreline. And that's not true. You can drag for both oysters and quahogs. And we just had a very nice spaghetti alla vongole using quahogs for dinner. And those quahogs came from near shore. There was something else about the Curley report. When you look at the tables, John, they did various staining to test fish. None of those tables mentioned bluefish or striped bass, and yet later on in that report, in the text, they mentioned, well, there are lots of shellfish and striped bass, and I've seen people fishing for striped bass up off the Harriman River Dike. So I wanted to refer people to the old report, but without criticizing it, wanted to be a little more clear about our expectation.
Well, just in response to that one particular item about the striped bass, I recall the Curley report, I don't know where it is, but there was somewhere when they were talking about their methods for sampling striped bass, that they were inadequate. That there wasn't, that you're not able to collect striped bass by the kind of seining they were doing. And trawling they were doing. So they pointed that out. And today there's new technology that's got to do with cameras. I know that Owen Nichols mentioned that they use cameras on the bottom right now. And so I think that, you know, using the Curley report as a jumping off point is fine, but you can't, it's not a Bible. I mean, I think that it's not something that you can look at it and say, oh, here's a definitive way to do this. It was a starting point, and I think that there's going to be changes, and there's going to be new technology. 50 years ago, you know, there's going to be new technology that's going to help a lot. And when it comes to the shellfish, I know from the 1960s that shellfish were dispersed much differently than they are today. And I think that if it's accurate, you know, I think from the landings they were talking about that only 7% of the income from shellfishing was oysters, and the bulk of it was quahogs. That has obviously changed significantly. So, and just while I'm just thinking about it, my frame of thought when it comes to the wild fishery versus what's going on in aquaculture right now, you can't just say we're only going to study the wild fishery. I think that's a mistake. I think that you have to quantify how many people are fishing with aquaculture grants right now, especially because now we're talking about possibly adding another grant out to the Delta property. I think it's important that it all be included, everything that's going on. You know, kiteboarding, windsurfing, whatever you want to talk about the harbor, it's all harbor use. Anything that goes on in the harbor is worth knowing about, even if it's just a simple sentence or paragraph.
I like you tightened it up, actually, John, because I think we've only got a certain amount of spend, and we need to give some pretty specific guidance on how to get the most for our dollars. I mean, what's the most important to us? Isn't that what we should be bringing them?
Yeah.
John, to your point about the technology having improved, I think that's an excellent point, which needs to be included. In the past 50 years, there has been some major changes. As far as aquaculture, I think we'll get some sort of a report. Let's assume all of this goes through, somebody does some work, we'll get a report from them. We can add to that report, for example, things about aquaculture. I have, and the most recent copy I have only goes back is from 2018. I have a report from the shellfish department, which lists all the takings, quahog, oysters, other species, whether it's by dragging, whether it's by wild picking, whether it's by aquaculture. So I think that is good background. Does the shellfish department still issue that sort of report each year?
So your 2018 might be the most recent, and I've spoken to Nancy about this. I think that those are the most recent reports she had from DMF. So maybe she's got 2019 by now, possibly even 2020. I'm not sure, but
well, this comes from DMF, not her.
Right, and I don't know. Honestly, I don't know whether there's more recent data. There probably is, but to that point, I think a lot of this, when it comes to the money and the spending and how much it's going to cost to do this, like for instance, just to add the aquaculture part of it, a lot of this is going to be like detective work as much as like, so combining reports and studies that are already underway, combining data from DMF and from the shellfish department. That stuff that's all available, and it's just a matter of having somebody that's got the knowledge to be able to put it in a form that's digestible for the public.
Well, that's a fair point. When we get to talking about what's happening with shellfish, there has to be cooperation with the shellfish department, because they've got a lot of good data and ideas.
Yeah, and I also believe our board should be a guidance for this. I don't think we should be the definitive body to determine what's important and what's not. I think that there's people that do this for a living that should have input in that and say that here's what you should be thinking about. You know, the obvious things are, you know, sea level change and that kind of thing. But, you know, it's important that if you're going to look at stuff every 10 years, you know, there's all sorts of different things that go into buckets, you know, the economics bucket, the harbor health bucket, the, you know, anything, the shellfish bucket, the finfish bucket. So, you know, there's a bunch of different things that can be budgeted accordingly, depending upon what the technology is. And again, I don't, you know, we had one proposal that was done a long time ago from the Center for Coastal Studies. My thought is, I don't see that it's unreasonable to ask a few different entities to come up with a proposal for us. At least have the proposal so that we can have in dollars and cents, here's what you can get for X amount of dollars.
We have, John, we have to, the town procedures would require us to have three or more possible partners.
All right, well, so we could go through that right now. I mean, if anybody has any suggestions, I'd be, you know, I think there's a couple that I know of that, you know, so tell me.
John, I would love to have ideas from anybody. I would prefer that I prefer not be part of open discussion, though. I think there has to be some privacy about that. I will check that with Town Hall and see how they would like to handle it, but.
Okay, the point is, I don't think there's going to be any problem with coming up with at least 3 different companies that will be willing to do it.
You know,
I have a question.
I would love to have your ideas, John, but I already have about 4 people.
Well, there you go. Well, who's the one that, are you saying that our board should be the one that determines who these are going to be, or?
Yes.
You know, I'm confused a little bit here. We should be talking about it, but we shouldn't be talking about it.
I just don't want to be talking about specific names.
No, that's fine. But so how is that process going to play out then?
I guess I'll get a list and talk to each of you.
All right.
I have a question. At the, and this is a little bit distant from what we're talking about, maybe not, but at the more recent State of the Harbor Conference, there was a presentation by Owen Nichols about fish content and so forth in the harbor. Everyone, I assume, saw part of that. And I wonder if that isn't, I'm not aware of all the details, but it seems as though it's part of what we've been talking about all along, and that maybe they've already gotten something started. Does that make sense, John? Or you know what I'm talking about?
Center for Coastal Studies
Yeah.
with Owen Nichols is the primary agent from the Center for Coastal Studies. Got a grant from the Friends of Herring River to make a study of what I call bait fish, small fish in the north of the harbor. And this was Owen's report. There was a site near the town pier. There was a site not far from Powers Landing, and there was a site up in the gut. And what was behind this is that the Friends of Herring River were interested to know what was going to happen to bait fish after the restoration took place, because bait fish like silversides, mummichog, nest up in the salt marshes. That's where they feed and where they nest. So there should be a jump in the population. And it's actually something I'm interested in very much too. You because we've got other marshes like Blackfish Creek, like Silver Springs, which is the brook that runs into the Audubon property, Middle Meadow. I think measuring the bait fish gives us a good idea of the health of those marshes. So I think Owen made a good start, but we have to pick up on it.
I can also just chime in. Owen, I think it was the last in-person 2018 meeting we had, maybe it was 2019 of the Harbor Conference.
Yeah.
2019, I guess I put together a poster about the Curley Report 50 years later, and Owen stopped by and he was like very enthusiastic about the whole concept of it. He loved that report. So to hear, you know, he's been on board, and who knows whether there's some self-promotion going on with what he did for the last Harbor Conference, the virtual one, but he's definitely familiar with it. The Center for Coastal Studies did a survey down in Pleasant Bay. The Friends of Pleasant Bay hired them to do. So it's the kind of work that they do, and he would love to be involved in it. So that's kind of where his enthusiasm started for that, or I was aware of him anyways, was at that conference.
John, do you think you could get a copy of the report on the work at Pleasant Bay? I have tried a couple of times without success.
Yeah, I got it. I know it's online. You can actually, I believe it's on the Center for Coastal Studies website. I'll find the link and I'll email it to you guys all.
I thought that would be a big help in writing our own request for proposal.
Yeah, they've got their own focus down there, which a big part of it was the seals. So seal spat was a big thing for them, and Pleasant Bay is obviously a different embayment than Wellfleet Harbor, but you're right, it's valuable, so you can see what they do and what their report might end up looking like. And yeah, I'll find that link and I'll email it to us all.
That's great. What's behind my mind on this is that we don't have any specific action items ready to discuss. So someone might ask the question, well, you're going to spend $50,000 on this, and you're going to have this nice survey. What's your next step? What's your action? Well, my answer at the moment is you can't have the action till you see the survey. But that I would, if we had,
here's the
if we had another report, some examples of the sort of actions.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, the other thing is, I think that when it comes to, I know that we're talking $50,000. We're negotiating against ourselves without even having seen what the cost might be. So there's something backwards about that kind of thinking.
I'm negotiating with the select board.
So somebody at the select board told us that 50,000 is going to be the cap. Is that what you're saying?
I think, given the status of finances in the town of Wellfleet, any expenditure has to be justified. And so I wanted to try, and that's one of the reasons why I want to have this thing. I want to have a fixed number before town meeting, so we can be clear to people what it is we're spending. It's not just a ceiling number, it's the actual number.
Okay, well, here's an idea. So again, we're coming back to doing things in reverse. Why don't we go ahead, find 3 different entities or 4 different entities to send out, say, here's what we want to do, give us a price. And that way we can just get a simple, I think it was a 1-letter thing we got from the Center for Coastal Studies, a 1-page document. It's not hard to put, I think that's the kind of thing they would do. And that way we could have some place to start from. We could say, here's what we've got. We've got 3 different ideas. You know, I mean, I do it all the time for people, telling people what things might cost if they wanted to do something. And that's what they do for a living. They would be trying to, it's a big ticket item for them, being able to get an ongoing report that they could get, say, $50,000 every 10 years to do a report and an action plan that would be something that would benefit them as well as us.
I will try to make some corrections based on this conversation and what John has sent. I'll try to get some clarity from town purchasing agent on how we can proceed, or the town administrator.
Mhm.
And I'll get back to you. Are there any, if anyone thinks of any, in the meantime, when you see the next draft, or have any ideas, please let me know. I think I've got some good comments here already.
And the idea, the idea of the document I just sent around to everybody is that I was hoping that you guys would all come up with additions or subtractions, corrections on that document, so that we could tighten it up a little bit.
Okay. Herb had his hand up.
It's a naive question. Every day almost, I'm reading or hearing really frightening reports about the increasing rate of sea rise. The latest is this concern about an enormous ice shelf in Antarctic that seems to be melting from underneath, that would then release an enormous iceberg ice flow into the ocean, into the world's oceans, where they're talking about sea rise not measured in inches, but in feet. And we're looking at everything we're talking about here is a 10-year scope. Whose responsibility is it within the town to flag the point when you need to go into an emergency plan? And is that part of what we're talking about here? And the second item is sea level rise.
Yeah, oh, it's part of it for sure. John had some thoughts there. I know that there's a gauge at the pier. That's how they measure it right now, I believe. As well as there's a pole on Old Wharf Road by the corner of where Blackfish Creek comes in there. And I'm thinking 3 places somewhere in the harbor, there should actually be like a stick that's permanent that you could measure it actually in Wellfleet Harbor. Rather than, or if it's just more appropriate to gather NOAA data, or whoever would have that kind of data, how high is it coming in a yearly basis?
There was a meeting about a week ago, a report from Barnstable County organization on the effect of sea level rise on low-lying roads. Which are the roads that are going to flood first?
Like Old Wharf.
An interesting report. Herb, it had a faster rate of sea level rise as its basis than the graph that we showed in our harbor management plan, which is only 6 months old, NOAA report. And there are some low-lying roads that are at risk. For example, some on East Commercial. One of the things that I have to try to get back to the people in the Cape Cod Commission. The report didn't take into account the effect of wind. And not only are the tides going up, but we're going to get more wind. And there was one woman there who lives on a along the west side of Indian Neck said, well, you didn't show us as a low-lying road, yet we keep getting flooded. And I'm guessing that she was partly seeing a wind-driven tidal surge. So I wanted to follow up on that. But your basic principle is right. It's not getting better.
Yeah, I could, from the Shellfish Advisory Board, as a member of Shellfish Advisory, I can tell you that they're worried about things changing in terms of the flats no longer being exposed at low tide as much as they are now. So that's going to be a big concern, where there's a lot of people that are in, near shore aquaculture grants and et cetera. They're going to end up being deep water grants eventually, 50 years down the road. So it's worth paying attention to.
I raised that point, particularly in terms of the HIDLA grants off the southwest corner of Indian Neck, because the on the landward side of that, there's revetments. So what's going to happen, as I see it, is the ocean is going to start lapping up against those revetments higher and higher. The people that own the houses have to be sure that their revetments are strong, but that's going to make it much more difficult to do shell fishing off those grants. That's not the only place in town where there's a problem.
There is, as we had put input regarding this kind of thing to the what is it, climate change and something committee now that's trying to tie various groups like us together with planning for climate change and sea level rise in the town. And that's one thing that's happening, Herb. I mean, there is a group that's
actually that committee was the one that sponsored this Zoom meeting where the Cape Cod Commission reported.
Mm-hmm.
But my question was, whose responsibility, or is it our responsibility in talking about creating a report like this to build in a triggering point to move to an emergency plan? Because would that it is even in 50-year time frame. I'm not hearing 50-year time frames anymore when sea rise is going to have real effects on us. We're talking about a 10-year scope here.
Herb, I think the way we should handle that is to go back to the harbor plan and say, in a sense, oops, the most recent data is worse than this. And point that out to the select board, to the Shellfish Advisory Board particularly, that to the wastewater committee too, actually, that these are real concerns.
So, yeah, so including that, I see if we're going to be able to get this off the ground and get this on a 10-year basis, I could see a portion of it dealing with the sea level rise being something as simple as, here's the stake at the pier, here was the level, 8 feet 1 inch, 2021. 2022, I could see having every year a new measurement on that gauge that says what the average is. And that would be the way that it would be included in a report, and it could be part of an action plan. And there could be a trigger, if it reaches 9 feet, we're in deep trouble. So I don't know, but I think that that's the kind of thing that could be included and that's measurable now. I mean, if there's already a gauge at the town pier, and there's already a stake out on by Old Wharf Road, that's a starting point. So that's the kind of thing that would be extremely valuable to be included in this report and action plan we're putting together.
You've just given me, I've been talking about we needed to identify some risk which might be followed up with an action plan. I think Herb has just pointed out the one of sea level rise, because sea level rise is going to greatly affect particularly shellfish habitat. And repeating what I call the Curly study right now, give us a baseline of where the shellfish are and which of them are going to be affected, and what we ought to pay attention. Let me have a shot at a redo. This is a good conversation. We've got a couple other things I wanted to talk about, and I'll get this out over the weekend, and we'll have another shot at it just online. More ideas are welcome. The dredging alternative. As far as I know, we have not received any positive response to our request for proposal. And so I have been thinking about that, and I have, if you remember, the request for proposal talked about 3 steps in the process. One is to suck the black mustard material up off the bottom. The second was to do the dispersion, and the third was then to pipe the material back into the main harbor flow, so it'd be carried out either out into the deep harbor or up to the Duck Creek marshes. And I think that it was a mistake to talk about all 3 steps. I think we should have talked just about dispersion, which is the critical step, because the other 2 we know how to do. And so I have been thinking about what are the critical steps in the process. And I thought it could be broken up into several small steps. And the one that appeals to me is to do a modeling of the tidal flows, which would answer the question, if we put material of a certain size into the tidal flow, where would it end up? If the material was too large, what would happen was sink right away, which we don't want to happen. I don't think it can ever be too small, but we have to find out where the right size is. And I know people who can do that sort of modeling. For not a terrible expense. And in fact, I realized that with a pencil, paper, and a little calculator, I can do part of it, because one of the critical things is, and you can all use this as a quiz question, is you have to use the Stokes equation. What the Stokes equation is an equation which allows you to calculate what is the settling rate of a particle in any fluid, in particular in water. And that's an equation which is 150 years old. It's very well agreed. So I can sit with a pencil and paper and use those calculations to set a target for how good the dispersion has to be, and then have that verified by the modeling. So I think that small step-by-step approach is a better one. And I'll try to work that out. As I said, we did have one company, Coastal Engineering, which showed some interest, but they never, as far as I know, they've never followed up. But I have to verify that. I'll keep you posted. In the meantime, I'm gonna have some fun actually doing science rather than talking about it. Let's talk about ponds. Herb and I have an appointment to meet with the Board of Health early next year. What lies behind that is that anytime we've talked about some sort of remediation to protect the ponds from phosphorus and nitrogen, we talk about changing the septic and sewage systems around the ponds. And Board of Health is the right people to talk to. We also should talk with the Conservation Commission so they understand. And the Coastal Wastewater Planning Committee, because they're using some of these new nitrogen removal technologies. So Herb and I are going to see the Board of Health, but I'd like Laura to be involved too. And so what I'm suggesting is, Laura, that you and Herb see the CONSCOM, and that then you and I see the Comprehensive Wastewater Planning Committee. And that way there'll be two of us at each meeting, and each of us only does two. So we get a little broader perspective on some of the issues there. If you agree with that, I think Herb, we could set up the meeting with the CONSCOM, because Hillary, who will be at the Board of Health meeting, is also conservation agent, and so she could get us on an agenda for the Conservation Commission. And I know that pretty well. I know the chairman of the Wastewater Planning Committee, and so I can get it's Kurt Felix. I can get him to let us know when one of their meetings is, and Laura and I could talk with him.
That sounds good.
So that gives us a little broader perspective on what's going on.
Good.
Herb, I think we have well, one thing you had said, Herb, and I'm just looking at my notes. You need a census of all the private properties on the ponds and what septic systems they have. That the Board of Health is the right people to ask if they have that. So,
If not, it's obtainable from the tax plans, and it's not as large a project as it sounds, because in reality, there aren't that many properties that directly border the ponds. I mean, it's manageable. Laura, do you have any idea how many there are in Long Pond? That's probably the largest after Gull Pond.
13 to 15.
And 29 on Gull Pond. So you're coming up with a census of under 100 properties you're going to have that should be included in a census.
yeah, but what the problem? The reason I'd like to ask the Board of Health first is it's fairly easy to get a census of who lives in and owns properties adjacent to the ponds. But we need to know what kind of septic they have. When was it?
Absolutely.
That is, I have never seen that as a public town document.
That shouldn't be that difficult. Basically, somebody at the Board of Health should be able to look at, I mean, you'd probably want to provide them with a list of the properties you'd like to know about. And once they had that, they just look in the files and see who's got a Title V and who doesn't.
I know.
I'm with John for just outright asking them first. I had it for Gull Pond, but we did it so many years ago, I can't remember how how we did it, but I think we got it at that time from the Board of Health. And
I know you can individually request it. I just don't know if you have any privacy issues in terms of us going in and asking for other people's info.
These are
Yeah,
public.
it's true.
What John is talking about, they're public documents which are on file.
Okay,
Board of Health office, which is where DPW is, you can go and look at them. And I had to do that for the Mayo Creek project. Because as we were raising sea level inside, proposing to, we had to be sure that wasn't going to affect the septic systems. And I'm sorry to say that there are some, how should we say, old fashioned septic systems on the perimeter of Mayo Creek. So
Another way to
Right.
do it, you could also go in the reverse, is you could also go through the assessor department and see who, since what, 1978, is that when Title V came in? Whose properties have been transferred since that date.
okay, that
And
means
anybody,
or
anybody,
upgraded, yeah.
yeah, well, anybody that's had a transfer since whenever that law came into effect, I think it's 78, should have been upgraded to a Title V. So that gives you an idea, and that's all public information.
I will, that's a good idea, John. I can go to Nancy Vale and ask if she could do the survey. Let's say for Gull and Long Pond. And one of the questions that I would ask her to provide as an answer is, when was the last date of transfer? Because that, if the Board of Health did its job, that should have triggered a change in the septic system.
We asked around Long Pond probably 5 years ago. So I somewhat have in my head the ones that were the really old ones at that point.
Nancy may already have a list of all the properties that are directly on the ponds too. I may have asked, it may have been last year or the year before, I don't recall, but she probably already has a list of the properties that would be pertinent to what we're talking about.
That makes it easy. Something also, Herb, to talk with the Board of Health about. I heard a rumor that they have a sort of a 10-year plan to get everybody onto at least Title V.
And wonderful. We were always told in Gupaka that they not have the authority to do that, but maybe that's changed, or maybe they've found the authority.
No, that has not changed. You can't make somebody, if they have a cesspool and it's still functioning and nobody's got any issues, I mean, if it's getting pumped out on a regular basis, that's a problem. But if there's no record of, you can't just make somebody upgrade to a Title V without, that would require some serious legislation. So it's not possible now until properties transfer, even if it's an inter-family transfer. If the deed changes, then you require an upgrade. But a lot of them may have already been done. It'd be interesting to know how many cesspools are still there.
Yeah. Because the concept that John and I were going back and forth on is the need for us still to be pulling together data that would be the basis for a plan. And what comes out again and again from the experts who are telling us is that the vast majority of nitrogen and phosphate entering the ponds is coming in through flow, ultimately from septic systems. I'm shocked at how much it was. We're hearing 78, 80% coming in from groundwater flow. And I think eventually, as part of our plan, that's going to have to be a main focal point.
Well, you may actually end up with a situation where all the pond properties may end up with tight tanks eventually, because we have very sandy soil everywhere in Wellfleet. So it's that's what happens. Stuff dissipates. There's a lot of people that have a lot of knowledge about that, but yeah, I think that short of going to tight tanks that get the septic doesn't go anywhere, Title V, I'm curious about these new systems. IA systems that are coming out, that are apparently, they need to be tested. There needs to be 50 test septic systems. I'm drawing a blank about the fellow who just gave us a presentation about that. But that's the kind of thing where maybe those systems will reduce it quite a bit too. But that again requires, that's not a Title V anymore. That's even more than Title V.
Yes.
So,
The person who made that presentation is a man called Scott Horsley. And he is working directly with wastewater committee, which is focused on the nitrogen problem in the harbor.
And there's also through APCC, actually one of their reports, one of their films, they had report from Brian Baumgartel that there is a Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, MASS-TC it's called, within the Barnstable County Department of Health and Environment. And there's Brian Baumgartner, that's his job, is to be testing and monitoring the new systems. And he's right, I guess he's in Barnstable. But I think that's one of the things down the line, we definitely have to meet with him. Can be a Zoom meeting, can be a phone call meeting, as to where, because he's working not only on systems that are monitoring systems that remove nitrogen, but also those that remove phosphates, which seems to be the real sticking point at this point. This time.
Speaking of the Association Preserve Cape Cod, Herb, I think we started to accumulate a list of questions that I think we'd like to go back again. Yes. And I had two, which I sent to you earlier this morning, and it would now share. What are the critical levels of N and P that demand action? And there's a lot of ponds out in the central part of the Cape Cod Peninsula, Dennis, Harwich, places like that. They're all the way over to Falmouth that are in bad shape. What are the levels of NNP that triggered, that demand action? And what does APCC recommend as the current best practices to not only protect ponds, but treat ponds that require action? So you've got a pond that's in problem, how do you treat it? And I remember hearing 10 years ago about people were putting alum into ponds. I don't know if they still do that.
Treat is a forbidden word in our vocabulary.
What's a forbidden word, sorry?
Treat.
yeah.
It just, I've been on this since mid 80s and going back and forth to the National Seashore. The one word you don't even go near, the third rail, is treat in terms of dumping anything into a pond. And there's stories, and maybe Laura heard them as well, about years past when people would dump alum and other things into the ponds. But that's in the 70s and earlier.
Well, I'll tell you, I had some fun playing with my many years old knowledge of chemistry, and I said to myself, well, suppose I was thinking of phosphorus. Suppose you put into one of the Wellfleet ponds a small treatment of, say, calcium acetate. I don't know if you can even go to a store and buy calcium acetate. Well, what would happen, Herb, is two interesting things. First of all, calcium phosphates, I'm pretty sure, insoluble. So it precipitates the phosphorus down to the surface. And the acetate would react to water to produce an acidity. And you've said, well, the pH is going up, acidity takes the pH back down again.
But-
Now, you don't want to have an ex-chemist.
Yeah, I'm curious to what APCC has to say about it,
Right.
you
There's a-
know?
I just thought we should have a little fun. Christmas is coming.
Yeah, well, I'm with
Yeah.
Herb on that. I think that.
Probably need a truckload of it.
And I think the third thing that would happen is probably all 5 of us would be arrested.
Right.
Yeah, when it comes to that, it's gonna be a major uproar about putting anything in the pond, so,
I agree.
I've got a foolish question for them too.
But the point is, if we can find out what's used in the ponds, which do need to use a naughty word, treated, we could then ask the question, how can we take that chemistry and bring it inland as a preventive agent? So I mean, it's there's method in the madness here.
But there's a couple things. I talked about collecting data on the ponds for 2 reasons. One is I'm still stuck on that what we should be doing is creating a plan to keep the ponds in their present state for 10 years, in the hope that remediation will be there will be much greater advancements in 10 years. So in collecting data on the ponds, there's 2 points. One is to define the present state of each of the ponds that we want to maintain for 10 years. And the other is what John had mentioned, is what is the tipping points for phosphates and nitrates. Now, Joanne Muramato of APCC, we had that meeting with her. She was very helpful on both of those. She first of all gave us a list of the towns that are monitoring for nitrates and phosphates that are currently doing it. And the ones nearest are Eastham, Harwich, and Orleans. All have plans now where they're monitoring their ponds for phosphates and nitrates. So I think we can just go to them first and say, what are the levels you're monitoring for? Who's doing it? And what are the levels you're monitoring for? Remember, I had sent her a list of questions that she marked up and sent back to us. And I think we distributed that among everybody. And she listed the towns near us that are currently monitoring for phosphates and nitrates, which is really fascinating. And she had also given us the list, an extensive list of what should be monitored to determine the present status of a pond. So, those are 2 projects.
One other question you could put to her, I can see this coming, is where do you think we could get some money so that we, representing the town of Wellfleet, could take over some of this work ourselves? I'm not hearing a long-term commitment from the seashore. And long-term monitoring requires money. So who might we apply for grant money? I think that would be a useful question for Joanne. So we've got some questions for Joanne. We've got meeting with the Board of Health, meeting with CONSCOM, meeting with the wastewater planning committee. With any luck, by February, we might be in a position where we could actually begin to draft an action plan. And when we have such a thing, I would like to find some way to discuss it with the select board. How should I say it? Ponds are not high on their agenda, so we have to do a little something to create an interest. The only thing that they ever talk about in terms of ponds is when they present a report on parking and pond usage via the parking lots.
There are two board members who are currently more related to the ponds.
John is.
Yeah, and Helen is as well. Helen's been our, putting on my Gupaka hat, has been our contact with the board for years and
Okay, thank
always
you.
come to all our meetings.
I think that, good, there's so that there are at least two people who got some background and would be supportive. Thank you for reminding me about both of them.
Yeah.
Herb,
Yeah.
I've got a naive question for Joanne too, in terms of, I've heard not only Joanne, but the park talk about as temperatures continue to elevate and the winds don't cool the water, that we're getting more stratification on temperature and oxygen. Is there any way to be remediating the fact that the levels don't bend? Sorry, I've got just in terms of like species health and health of pond, in terms of helping the oxygen flow. It's probably a totally dopey question, but I've thought of it a couple times while they've been giving those presentations.
Oh, it's one of the it's one of the criteria that Joanne had flagged is dissolved oxygen,
Yeah.
top, mid, and bottom. And
Right,
the turnover is really one of the critical criteria.
massive aggregator.
Yeah, I think an interesting meeting we have to have again sometime with the seashore is how defined are they in their plans for monitoring the ponds for the next several years? And can the town of Wellfleet share in their data on a real-time basis? I don't think that's been done in the past. And John, that ties into your question on cost. To the extent that data can be shared by the National Seashore with the town, that's a direct reduction in cost of any testing that the town would have to do.
I guess what I heard Herb, perhaps not correctly, is the seashore, first of all, wanted to completely review its data before it released it. And I hear that there's a limit to how far down the road they're going to be able to do this testing. So those
Yes,
are two questions we have to put again.
yes. And one thing is right now, and I understand Sophia's point on historical data. It was collected over so many years, certainly different criteria. They were going back and making sure that it was all, I don't want to say accurate, but logical within the database. That's a different question from the measurements, the monitoring they have going forward. Is it possible to share that on a real-time basis with the town? Just simply on the basis that any monitoring the seashore does and shares with the town is monitoring the town doesn't have to worry about paying for, presumably.
So where we go from here is we've got the Board of Health meeting in January. I'll set up something with the wastewater planning committee. When we have the Board of Health meeting, that will give us a link to set up something with the Conservation Commission. Got some questions for the seashore and the questions for Joanne. Herb and Laura, in terms of contacting the seashore and APCC, feel free that you two are delegating to you. So go ahead and do what you need to do. I'm hoping that by mid-ish February, we'll be able to sit together and actually begin to work out what the steps are. We will have gathered enough information to be able to do that.
Why don't Laura and I talk, Laura, sometime over the next couple of days, and we can get back to John. This is not a busy time of year, right?
Only slightly busy. We're off to New Jersey on a week from today, and then early the following week off to Arizona. But so Arizona is only 2 hours different from here. We can manage that. Last action item, minutes of December the 1st. I sent out a draft, I hope. Includes some notes that Laura had. Are there any changes or discussion?
Didn't see any typos. Same.
I move we accept. Second? All in favor?
Yep.
Okay. Somebody's gonna have to vote no sometime, otherwise people are gonna be suspicious. Next meeting will depend a little bit on the flow of things. I don't think it'll be too much on ponds, but we've got the harbor survey and the dredging issue to discuss, but I won't know until after the new year where we stand on that. So I move we adjourn, and best holiday wishes and happy new year to everybody. Thanks for all
You
the
too.
help you've been. And, we'll see you in 2022.
Mhm.
All right.
Bye
Thanks,
now.
everybody.
See y'all.